My roommate kept using my address for his dropshipping business, so I redirected his inventory to a storage lock he had to pay for. There is a unique frequency of exhaustion that comes from living with someone who treats your apartment like a commercial fulfillment center. For 6 months, I shared a quiet, sunlit 2-bedroom with Chase, a self-proclaimed entrepreneur whose entire personality was built around podcast clips and hustle culture. I work from home as a data analyst, valuing a clean, predictable environment. Chase, however, was running a dropshipping empire out of our living room. What started as a few small mailers quickly metastasized into a labyrinth of corrugated cardboard, blocking the hallway and turning our front porch into a chaotic loading dock. I spent my days apologizing to confused delivery drivers and navigating around pallets of cheap plastic gadgets. I asked him to stop. I asked him to move. He just told me to embrace the grunt. That was when I decided to stop asking and start redirecting. To understand the sheer volume of cardboard that invaded my life, you must understand Chase's philosophy on personal space. When we signed the lease on our apartment, I was drawn to the exposed brick and the quiet, tree-lined street. Chase was drawn to the open concept living area, which he immediately rebranded as his collaborative workspace. He was 24, fueled by pre-workout supplements, and possessed an unshakable belief he was one viral product away from early retirement. His side of the apartment looked like a supplement commercial, complete with a neon sign reading "Grind" and a refrigerator stocked exclusively with raw eggs and charcoal water. For the first 2 months, our arrangement was perfectly functional. We split utilities, kept common areas reasonably clean, and exchanged polite nods when passing in the hallway. I cooked quiet dinner. He recorded loud motivational voice memos in his bedroom. It was a compromise we both accepted. The dynamic shifted in early autumn when Chase announced he was pivoting from affiliate marketing to dropship. He secured a supplier for novelty kitchen gadgets, specifically a motorized garlic press he claimed would disrupt the culinary space. Initially, the inventory consisted of a few manageable cardboard boxes stacked neatly in his bedroom corner. I was supportive. I even offered him pizza when his first batch arrived. As weeks passed, the test batch evolved into a massive, uncontrolled supply chain. The boxes multiplied. They spilled out of his bedroom and colonized the living room. They formed a precarious tower near the television, creating a physical barrier between the sofa and kitchen. The physical toll on the apartment was immediate. The constant rustle of packing tape and the dull thud of cardboard hitting the floor became my evening soundtrack. The air grew thick with the drop, smell of corrugated paper, and the faint chemical odor of cheap plastic off-gassing from the gadgets. More frustrating than the mess was the logistical chaos it inflicted on my daily routine. Because Chase was using our residential address for his business, my home became the default destination for every freight delivery and postal package he ordered. I work remotely, managing complex financial models that require deep, uninterrupted concentration. Instead, my mornings were routinely interrupted by the aggressive buzzing of the doorbell. I would pause my spreadsheets, walk to the front door, and find a frustrated delivery driver holding a clipboard, demanding a signature for a pallet of garlic presses. I tried to address the issue reasonably. One evening, while navigating around a stack of boxes that blocked the path to the bathroom, I sat Chase down at the small dining table. I explained that the sheer volume of inventory was violating the residential terms of our lease and making the apartment unlivable. I suggested he rent a commercial storage unit or use a third-party fulfillment center. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his charcoal water, and gave me a patronizing smile. He told me I was thinking too small. He explained that renting a storage unit was an overhead expense that would eat into his profit margins before he scaled. He claimed he needed the inventory physically close so he could fulfill orders with agility. When I pointed out that he had not fulfilled a single order in 3 weeks because he was too busy playing video games, he rolled his eyes and told me I just did not understand the entrepreneurial mindset. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday in late November. I had a critical hour-long video conference with the senior partners at my firm. I had prepped for this meeting for 3 days. I locked my office door, put on my noise-canceling headphones, and muted my microphone. 20 minutes into my presentation, The building's freight elevator dinged. A heavy, rhythmic thudding echoed down the hallway, followed by the aggressive pounding of our front door. I ignored it, hoping Chase would handle it. The pounding continued, escalating into a frantic, sustained ringing of the doorbell. My colleagues on the screen paused their talking, looking confused by the noise bleeding through my headphones. I muted myself, apologized, and walked into the hallway. Standing at the door was a massive delivery driver holding a digital scanner. Behind him, blocking the entire corridor, was a wooden pallet wrapped in thick plastic. On top of the pallet sat 500 units of a neon green battery-operated lint roller. The driver informed me in a very loud voice that he needed a physical signature for the freight delivery and that he was not authorized to leave it in the hall. I signed the scanner with a trembling hand, my face burning with embarrassment as my colleagues watched the ordeal on my webcam. The driver used a pallet jack to wheel the massive load into our entryway, scraping the hardwood floor in the process. He dropped it with a heavy thud, effectively sealing the front door from the inside. Chase emerged from his bedroom wearing his headphones, completely oblivious to the chaos. He looked at the pallet, gave the driver a thumbs up, and went back to his room. I stood in the hallway, staring at the 500 neon green lint rollers that were now physically trapping me in my own apartment. I realized then that reasoning with Chase was impossible. He viewed my boundaries as obstacles to his success. If I wanted my home back, I had to stop treating him like a roommate and start treating him like a commercial tenant. I spent the next 48 hours researching municipal zoning laws, residential lease addendums, and commercial freight forwarding protocol. I discovered a critical loophole regarding residential mail receiving and commercial freight drop-offs. Our lease explicitly prohibited using the premises for commercial freight receiving without prior written landlord permission, and it strictly defined the apartment as a residential dwelling only. I formally notified the property management office of his commercial operations, securing a written directive that any future freight deliveries to our address would be rejected at the door. Then, I opened a new browser tab and set up a commercial mail forwarding address under his specific business name, routing directly to a private storage facility across town. I printed the confirmation pages, filed them in a neat folder, and placed them on the kitchen counter. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait for his next massive shipment to arrive. The first test of my new system arrived on a Thursday morning. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing quarterly projections, when my phone buzzed with a notification from the freight forwarding service. A package addressed to Chase's business had been received at the storage facility and scanned into his private locker. 10 minutes later, a delivery truck pulled up to our building. I watched through the living room window as the driver approached the front entrance, clipboard in hand. Before he could even ring the bell, the building's property manager, a stern woman named Helen, intercepted him in the lobby. I had provided her with the written directive and a copy of the lease addendum the previous day. Through the glass, I watched Helen point to the document, then point firmly toward the street. The driver looked confused, checked his manifest, and eventually shrugged, loading the package back onto the truck. My phone buzzed again. The forwarding service confirmed the redirect was complete. The system was working. For the next 3 days, I said absolutely nothing to Chase. I wanted him to discover the disruption organically, to feel the slow, creeping confusion of a supply chain breaking down without explanation. He spent most of his time in his bedroom, headphones on, entirely disconnected from the logistics of his own business. He was still operating under the assumption that his inventory was flowing seamlessly into our living room. The first sign of his awareness came on Sunday afternoon. He emerged from his room, stretching and yawning, and walked into the living room. He paused, looking around with a furrowed brow. The room was noticeably empty. Over the past week, I had quietly moved all of his remaining cardboard boxes into a neat, consolidated stack against the far wall, reclaiming the sofa and the kitchen pathway. He stared at the cleared space for a long moment, then looked at me, sitting calmly at the dining table with my laptop. "Where are the new shipments?" he asked, his voice carrying a note of genuine bewilderment. "I ordered 200 units of the garlic press on Friday. They should have been here by now." I didn't look up from my screen. "I haven't seen any deliveries." I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. Maybe there's a delay with the supplier. He frowned, pulling out his phone and tapping furiously through his order dashboard. I watched his expression shift from confusion to irritation as he scrolled through tracking numbers. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "The tracking says delivered, but the status changed to redirected. What does that even mean?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch just long enough to build the tension in the room. Then I closed my laptop and turned to face him. "It means the building management has formally prohibited commercial freight deliveries to this address," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Our lease is for residential use only. The property manager has the authority to reject any shipment that violates those terms." Chase's eyes wide, his jaw tightened. "You went to the landlord behind my back? That's my business you're interfering with. Those are my products. Your business was violating the terms of our lease," I replied calmly. "And since you refused to secure a commercial address, I took the liberty of setting one up for you." I reached into my folder and slid a printed sheet across the dining table. It contained the login credentials for the commercial mail forwarding service and the address of the storage facility across town. "Every package addressed to your business name is now being automatically redirected to a private locker at Secure Store on 5th Avenue. Your inventory is safe. You just have to go pick it up." He stared at the paper as if it were a live grenade. "A storage locker?" he repeated, his voice rising in pitch. "Do you have any idea how much those cost? The monthly fees alone would eat my entire profit margin. I told you, I can't afford overhead right now." "Then you should have thought about that before you turned our living room into a warehouse," I said, standing up and walking toward the kitchen. "The first month's storage fee has already been billed to the credit card on file. You might want to check your account." The color drained from his face. He lunged for his phone, opening his banking app with frantic, jabbing fingers. I heard a sharp intake of breath as the charge appeared on his screen. $185, the monthly rate for a climate-controlled, commercial-grade storage unit with 24-hour access. For a man who refused to pay for parking and reused paper towels to save pennies, the charge was a direct assault on his financial philosophy. He paced the length of the living room, his sneakers squeaking against the hardwood, muttering under his breath about sabotage and betrayal. He accused me of trying to destroy his business, of being jealous of his entrepreneurial spirit, of conspiring with the landlord to force him out. I let him vent, absorbing his words without reacting. I had already won the structural argument. The lease was clear, the forwarding was legal, and his inventory was now his responsibility, not mine. By the end of the week, the situation had escalated in a way I had not entirely anticipated. Chase refused to pay for a vehicle large enough to transport his inventory from the storage facility. Instead, he began making multiple daily trips on his bicycle, strapping cardboard boxes to the handlebars and the rear rack with bungee cord. He looked like a post-apocalyptic courier, wobbling down the sidewalk with towers of neon green lint rollers swaying precariously above his head. The neighbors began to stare. Helen, the property manager, started documenting his trips with her phone, compiling evidence of continued commercial activity at a residential address. The pressure was mounting from every direction, and Chase was buckling under the weight of his own stubbornness. On Saturday evening, I came home from a quiet dinner with friends to find him sitting on the bare living room floor, surrounded by a mountain of opened boxes. He was holding one of the garlic presses, turning it over in his hands, staring at it with an expression of profound defeat. He looked up at me, his eyes hollow and exhausted. "The storage facility just sent me a late fee notice," he said quietly, "and the supplier is threatening to cancel my account if I don't fulfill my minimum order quota by the end of the month." I looked down at him, sitting amidst the opened cardboard and neon green plastic. The arrogance that usually defined his posture was entirely gone, replaced by the heavy, slumped shoulders of a man watching his financial projections evaporate in real time. I did not offer him sympathy, nor did I gloat. I simply walked over to the kitchen island, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter. I explained that his business model was fundamentally flawed if it relied on violating a residential lease and avoiding basic overhead costs. I told him that a company cannot scale if its foundation is built on exploiting a roommate's living space. He stared at the garlic press in his hand, turning the cheap plastic crank with his thumb. He looked around the room, finally seeing the space not as a collaborative workspace, but as a residential living area that he had disrespected. He muttered about the supplier being unreasonable, but the excuses lacked their usual conviction. The math was undeniable. Between the monthly storage fees, the late penalties, and the cost of the freight forwarding service, his profit margin on the remaining inventory was entirely negative. The next morning, the defeat fully set in. Chase sat at the dining table, his laptop open, and began the arduous process of liquidating his empire. He listed the remaining pallets of lint rollers and garlic presses on a wholesale liquidation website, selling them at a massive loss just to recoup his initial capital. He also formally canceled his account with the original supplier, effectively ending his dropshipping venture before it had truly begun. When the liquidation buyer agreed to purchase the remaining stock, they required the inventory to be picked up from a commercial loading dock, not a residential apartment. This meant Chase had to transport the remaining boxes from the storage facility directly to the buyer's warehouse. He rented a small cargo van for the weekend. I spent Saturday morning sitting on the sofa, drinking coffee and reading a book, while Chase and two hired helpers lugged the remaining cardboard boxes out of the storage unit and into the van. The helpers moved with efficient, practiced speed, treating the boxes not like precious inventory, but like mere cargo. Chase directed them with a quiet, subdued authority, a stark contrast to his usual loud, performative management style. He did not bring a single box back to our apartment. The physical transformation of our living space was immediate and profound. As the last of the corrugated cardboard was loaded into the vehicle, the apartment actually felt larger. The air, previously thick with the dry, dusty smell of paper and off-gassing plastic, began to clear. I opened the windows, letting the crisp autumn breeze flush out the lingering scent of his failed enterprise. The hardwood floor, previously hidden beneath a labyrinth of inventory, gleamed in the sunlight, free of scuff marks and packing tape residue. When Chase returned the van and came back up to the apartment, he looked exhausted but strangely relieved. He walked into the living room, taking in the open, breathable space. He walked over to the dining table and slid a piece of paper toward me. It was the receipt for the final payment to the storage facility, along with the confirmation that he had closed the account. He also handed me a check for his half of the utility bill, which he had been neglecting in favor of funding his inventory. He looked at me, his expression a mix of lingering embarrassment and genuine respect. He admitted quietly that I had been right about the overhead. He confessed that he had been so focused on the illusion of scaling that he had blinded himself to the basic financial realities of running a business. He told me he was going to look for a standard logistics job, something with a steady paycheck, and leave the entrepreneurial hustle to people who actually had the capital to support. I accepted the check and the receipt, nodding in acknowledgement. I did not rub his nose in it or demand an apology. The boundary had been established, and the consequence had been enforced. That was enough. We transitioned into a new, strictly functional roommate dynamic. We established a clear, unspoken agreement regarding the common area. The living room remained strictly for relaxation and socializing, and any business discussions were confined to his bedroom or conducted outside the apartment. The kitchen counters were cleared of his supplements, and the dining table was reclaimed for my actual work. The apartment returned to the quiet, predictable environment I had originally signed the lease for. I could work from home without the constant interruption of freight deliveries. I could walk from my bedroom to the kitchen without navigating an obstacle course of cheap plastic gadgets. The peace of the space was fully restored. Looking back, I realized that allowing Chase to use our apartment as a free warehouse was a failure of my own boundary setting. I had prioritized avoiding conflict over protecting my own living environment, and it cost me my peace of mind. But the experience taught me a valuable lesson about the true cost of saying yes when you mean no. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do for a person who refuses to respect your boundaries is to let them face the full, unmitigated reality of their own choices. I did not ruin Chase's business. I simply removed the free subsidy that was keeping it artificially alive. Now, when I sit in my living room listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and looking at my clean, unobstructed floors, I feel a profound sense of gratitude. My home is finally just my home, and the only thing I am storing storing there is my own peace of mind. It is a quiet victory, one that does not require an audience or a grand declaration. It is simply the deep settling comfort of knowing that your home belongs to you and your boundaries are finally, permanently intact.